Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the captivating world of the Enchanted April by Elizabeth von Arnim. As we begin this delightful journey, prepare to be whisked away to the sun-drenched shores of Italy, where four women discover the transformative power of friendship, love, and a little bit of magic. Join Mrs. Wilkins, Mrs. Arbuthnot, Lady Caroline, and Mrs. Fisher as they escape the dreariness of London and find unexpected solace in an Italian castle, where each room holds not just a spectacular view, but the promise of rediscovery and enchantment. Before we dive into this enchanting tale, we invite you to like, share, and subscribe to our audiobook channel. Your support helps us bring more timeless stories like this one to life and ensures you never miss an adventure. So sit back, relax, and let the Enchanted April sweep you off your feet. Enjoy the story. Chapter 1. On a gloomy February afternoon, London's weather was at its most miserable, casting a dreary pall over everything. Within the confines of a rather uncomfortable women's club, Mrs. Wilkins, a resident of Hampstead, found herself drawn to the agony column of the Times. As her eyes skimmed the page, she was arrested by an advertisement that seemed to speak directly to her soul. To those who appreciate wisteria and sunshine, small medieval Italian castle on the shores of the Mediterranean to be let furnished for the month of April. Necessary servants remain. Z. Box 1000, The Times. Mrs. Wilkins, an unassuming woman in her early 30s, was the wife of a solicitor named Mellersh Wilkins. Her life was structured around thrift and economy, virtues her husband valued highly, except when it came to food. Her wardrobe was modest, filled with clothes that spoke of careful savings rather than fashion. As she read the advertisement, a flicker of something dormant within her stirred. A longing for something beyond the rain-soaked pavements of London and the monotony of her daily life. Her savings, a sum of £90 meticulously gathered from her annual dress allowance, was meant to be a buffer against life's uncertainties. Yet, as she stood at the window watching the relentless rain, the idea began to form that perhaps this was the rainy day her husband had warned her about. Perhaps the medieval castle, with its promise of sunshine and wisteria, was not an impossible dream, but a necessary escape. Turning from the window, her mind still lingering on visions of Italy, she prepared to brave the rain for an errand, fish for Mellersh's dinner. But as she moved across the room, she noticed another woman, Mrs. Arbuthnot, seated at a table with the Times spread before her, absorbed in the same advertisement. Mrs. Arbuthnot, whom Mrs. Wilkins knew from church but had never spoken to, was a woman of a different circle. She was involved with the church, dedicated to charitable works, and seemed to possess the serene patience of one who spent her life in service to others. Yet beneath her efficient exterior, Mrs. Arbuthnot carried an air of sadness. The impulse to speak to her was unexpected, but Mrs. Wilkins found herself sitting down opposite Mrs. Arbuthnot, compelled by a shared sense of longing. "Are you reading about the medieval castle and the wisteria?" she found herself asking, surprising even herself. Mrs. Arbuthnot looked up, surprised but not unkind. She too had been caught by the advertisement, lost in dreams of a place far from her routine existence. "Why do you ask me that?" she replied, her voice gentle and grave. Thus began a tentative conversation, born out of shared yearning and dissatisfaction. Mrs. Wilkins, conscious of her shyness, found words tumbling out in a rush. She spoke of the advertisement's allure, of dreams of escape, and the possibility of renting the castle between them to escape the dreariness of their lives. Despite their unfamiliarity, Mrs. Wilkins felt a connection with Mrs. Arbuthnot, a kindred spirit trapped in similar circumstances. She suggested, almost breathlessly, that they could take the leap together, share the cost, and break free from their mundane routines for a month of sunlit respite. Mrs. Arbuthnot, rooted in her principles of duty and service, hesitated. Her life revolved around her responsibilities, her husband, Frederick, and her charitable endeavors. Yet something in Mrs. Wilkins' earnestness, in her vivid imagination and desperation for change, stirred something within her that had lain dormant for too long. Mrs. Wilkins's impulsive vision of the two of them beneath the blossoming wistaria at the castle was infectious. Despite herself, Mrs. Arbuthnot felt the pull of this imagined paradise. She had long since buried her own desires and dreams, finding solace in the predictable rhythm of duty. But now, faced with this unexpected invitation to adventure, the boundaries of her well-ordered life felt constrictive. The conversation flowed between them, a curious blend of practicality and fantasy. Mrs. Wilkins, with her longing for something more, and Mrs. Arbuthnot, with her disciplined reserve, found themselves contemplating an idea they hadn't dared consider before. The notion of a holiday, a break from their lives, seemed both reckless and irresistibly appealing. As Mrs. Wilkins spoke of the need for happiness, for a break from their roles, Mrs. Arbuthnot felt the weight of her own unhappiness. Her life, dedicated to others, had left little room for personal joy. The prospect of the Italian castle, with its promise of beauty and tranquility, was a temptation she could not easily dismiss. The conversation ended with a sense of possibility hanging in the air. They had not made a decision, but the seed of an idea had been planted, one that would alter the course of their lives. As they parted, each woman carried with her the image of a sun-drenched April in Italy, a vision that promised escape and renewal. As Mrs. Wilkins and Mrs. Arbuthnot left the club, the rain continued to fall, indifferent to the quiet revolution that had begun in their hearts. They walked back into their separate lives, but with a new undercurrent of hope and anticipation. The medieval castle awaited their decision, a beacon of wistaria and sunshine, offering a chance to step beyond the familiar confines of their existence. And so, as the door of the club closed behind them, a new chapter beckoned. A journey was about to begin, one that would lead them far from the rain-soaked streets of London to the sunlit shores of Italy, where the wistaria bloomed and the promise of enchantment awaited. Chapter 2. In the rainy, gray streets of London, Mrs. Arbuthnot's mind was awash with unease and excitement following her meeting with Mrs. Wilkins. Their chance encounter had led to a decision that was so unlike her, to answer an advertisement in the Times for a small medieval Italian castle to rent for the month of April. This impulsive act was driven by a sudden longing, one that seemed out of character for a woman whose life was defined by service, stability, and devotion. Mrs. Arbuthnot's days were typically filled with charitable work, organizing efforts for the less fortunate, and supporting the church's endeavors. Her husband, Frederick, a successful writer of scandalous historical memoirs, was a man she had long ceased to understand or connect with deeply. Their marriage had become a matter of duty rather than passion, and Mrs. Arbuthnot had turned her energies outward, seeking solace and purpose in helping others. Yet, Mrs. Wilkins's infectious enthusiasm and insistent vision of beauty and escape had stirred something dormant within her. Mrs. Wilkins, despite her incoherence and seemingly impulsive nature, had an uncanny ability to see beyond the mundane. Her eyes, bright with the visions of Italian sunshine and freedom, had struck a chord in Mrs. Arbuthnot, resonating with a hidden part of her that yearned for joy and self-indulgence, a longing she had buried beneath layers of piety and responsibility. Mrs. Arbuthnot had written to the mysterious Z, Box 1000, The Times, asking for details about the castle. The inquiry, though non-committal, felt like a transgression, a step into the unknown that both thrilled and frightened her. As she walked to her next meeting, the familiar landscape of her life seemed suddenly inadequate. Her thoughts were a whirl of guilt, excitement, and fear, emotions that had long been foreign to her orderly existence. Mrs. Wilkins had remarked on their feelings of guilt, attributing them to their otherwise immaculate lives. Mrs. Arbuthnot, though uncomfortable with such candid observations, could not deny the truth in them. Her existence had been one of duty, devoid of the kind of happiness that comes from personal fulfillment. She had always believed that living for others was the path to contentment, yet Mrs. Wilkins's words about different kinds of goodness, miserable and happy, had unsettled her certainties. The meeting she attended that afternoon was one of many she had spoken at, appealing for contributions to alleviate the needs of the Hampstead poor. But today, her heart was not in it. Her mind was filled with visions of Italy, of the possibility of stepping outside the confines of her life. Her usual eloquence failed her, and she noticed with a mix of relief and surprise that the audience remained unmoved by her speech. The vicar, who had come to rely on her persuasive powers, was disappointed noticing her distraction and commenting on the indifference of the crowd. "Perhaps they need a holiday," she suggested, an odd comment that surprised even her. When the vicar sarcastically questioned the timing, she replied, "Oh no, not till April," as if the decision had already been made. That night, her prayers were filled with pleas for guidance. She found herself unable to ask for the opportunity to disappear, for the medieval castle to be unavailable, because a part of her wanted it to be possible. The thought of spending her nest egg, a sum she had saved from the proceeds of Frederick's books, on such a personal indulgence was both thrilling and terrifying. It was a break from the self-denying life she had led, yet it also felt like a necessary act of self-preservation. Her reflections on the source of her nest egg were a constant torment. Frederick's books, which provided their income, were based on the lives of infamous historical figures, tales of immorality that were devoured by the public. She had long struggled with the knowledge that the money used for her charitable works was tainted by its origins, yet she had reconciled herself to it as best she could. The parish benefited, the poor were aided, but it was a compromise that left her soul uneasy. Frederick, absorbed in his work and the world he inhabited away from home, was a stranger to her now. Their early days, filled with love and shared dreams, were a distant memory. She had tried to maintain a connection, but the chasm between them had widened with each passing year, leaving her alone with her faith and her charitable pursuits. Her prayers for him were all she had left, a silent testament to a love that had once been vibrant and consuming. As she lay in bed, contemplating the future, Mrs. Arbuthnot realized that the decision to inquire about the castle was more than just a desire for escape. It was a step towards reclaiming a part of herself she had long denied. The possibility of joy, of beauty, and of a life lived for herself rather than others was both a promise and a challenge. The days ahead would reveal whether this leap into the unknown would lead to the happiness she had glimpsed in Mrs. Wilkins's vision. As the rain pattered softly against the window, she drifted into a fitful sleep, her dreams filled with the scent of Italian gardens and the warmth of the Mediterranean sun, hopeful that the path she had tentatively set upon would lead to a brighter, more fulfilling tomorrow. In the morning, the post would bring an answer from Z, Box 1000, The Times, and with it, the next step on a journey that promised to change everything. Chapter 3. As the days of March rolled by, London remained cloaked in its gray dampness, but within a cozy corner of its vastness, two women were igniting a spark of bold adventure. Mrs. Arbuthnot and Mrs. Wilkins had dared to dream of an April away from it all, in a place where wisteria and sunshine would be their only companions. The means to achieve this dream lay in the hands of an Englishman named Mr. Briggs, the owner of San Salvatore, a medieval castle perched on the Italian coast. It was a place promising all the romance of ancient battlements and the comfort of modern conveniences like electric lights. But this dream came at a hefty price, £60 for the month, a sum that seemed insurmountable for the two women. Faced with a dilemma as weighty as the castle's stone walls, Mrs. Arbuthnot and Mrs. Wilkins contemplated the improbability of their plan. £60 translated to a vast amount of sturdy boots for the needy, a consideration that weighed heavily on Mrs. Arbuthnot's charitable heart. And then there were the references demanded by Mr. Briggs, a formality, he assured, yet a barrier nonetheless. The very idea of soliciting references threatened to unravel their secret scheme, exposing it to the prying eyes of their respective worlds. Mrs. Wilkins, spirited and impulsive, had suggested a modest untruth. They would each tell their social circles that they were off to visit a friend in Italy. It was an explanation that would ease the minds of those, like her husband Mellersh, who might otherwise object to such a self-indulgent escapade. Mrs. Arbuthnot, however, hesitated to deceive, even in such a small way, preferring to avoid the indifferent sanction of her own husband, Frederick, who would likely encourage her to go, untroubled by her absence. The castle's enchanting promise took hold of them, and parting with it proved too bitter a pill. It was then that Mrs. Arbuthnot's practical mind devised a solution to the reference conundrum. She decided to visit Mr. Briggs in person, armed with the entire rent drawn from her savings bank. Her earnest demeanor and the sincerity in her eyes must have spoken volumes for Mr. Briggs. Charmed and convinced of her respectability, waived the need for references entirely. "You'll find the old castle has lots of sunshine," he assured her, as he scribbled a receipt. "Husband going?" Mrs. Arbuthnot, caught off guard, stumbled over her words, leading Mr. Briggs to assume she was a war widow. He blushed at his misstep, but the transaction was complete. With the matter of references resolved, only the financial burden remained. But fate had a way of lightening even this load. Mrs. Wilkins, with her boundless imagination, proposed they share the expense by finding 2 more women to join their Italian venture. They quickly placed an advertisement in the Times, seeking companions of like-minded desires. The response was not overwhelming, but it was sufficient. Among the applicants were Lady Caroline Dester, a young woman of high society seeking refuge from her own world, and Mrs. Fisher, an elderly, respectable widow who longed to bask in the sun and reminisce about a past filled with illustrious acquaintances. Lady Caroline, or Scrap, as she was known to her friends, brought with her a desire to escape the relentless social whirl and the familiar faces that populated it. When she met Mrs. Arbuthnot and Mrs. Wilkins, she saw in them the ideal chance to vanish from her usual sphere, and found them refreshingly devoid of any connections to her world. Mrs. Fisher, on the other hand, was steeped in the past, her home a shrine to the great Victorians she had known. She was intrigued by the prospect of a peaceful retreat, where she could sit in the Italian sun and indulge in memories of literary giants like Carlyle and Tennyson. Her one concern was Mrs. Wilkins's peculiar tendency to see things, an eccentricity that Mrs. Fisher decided she could tolerate for the sake of the Italian sunshine. After some negotiation and the waiving of references, Mrs. Fisher agreed to join them. Mrs. Wilkins, buoyant with the success of their plan, mused about Mrs. Fisher finding her level at San Salvatore, while Mrs. Arbuthnot silently hoped for a harmonious coexistence among their diverse group. As the train carried them away from Kensington, the 2 women allowed themselves to dream of the Mediterranean, where the sun would bathe them in warmth and the sea would whisper its timeless secrets. Their journey was set, and the promise of wisteria and sunshine, of peace and self-discovery, lay just across the azure waters of the Ligurian coast. With the arrangements complete and their companions chosen, Mrs. Arbuthnot and Mrs. Wilkins turned their thoughts to the journey ahead. Little did they know the adventure awaiting them at San Salvatore would be more transformative than they could ever imagine. What began as an escape into beauty and tranquility would soon unfold into a season of unexpected revelations and newfound friendships. Chapter 4. The journey to San Salvatore had been arranged with precision, as Mrs. Arbuthnot and Mrs. Wilkins were to arrive on the evening of March 31st, ensuring they avoided the bad omen of starting on April Fool's Day. Lady Caroline and Mrs. Fisher, strangers to one another, were scheduled to arrive on April 2nd, ensuring they traveled separately, and thus evaded the burden of forced companionship on their journey. This arrangement was meant to ease the transition into their Italian retreat, allowing Mrs. Wilkins and Mrs. Arbuthnot to settle in and prepare for the arrival of the others, who, despite the equal financial contribution, seemed more like guests. The end of March was riddled with tension for Mrs. Wilkins. Her heart pounded with a mix of guilt, fear, and determination as she broke the news to her husband, Mr. Wilkins, about her invitation to Italy. His disbelief was immediate and expected. Nobody had ever invited his wife to Italy before. Faced with his skepticism, Mrs. Wilkins had to present Mrs. Arbuthnot as proof. This was not without considerable persuasion, as Mrs. Arbuthnot herself struggled with the moral implications of their escapade. Confronting Mr. Wilkins brought her face to face with the realization of her drifting faith and increasing distance from her once unshakable spiritual convictions. March proved to be an uneasy month for both women. Mrs. Arbuthnot's conscience was relentless, challenging her intentions and questioning her moral fiber. Her prayers were interrupted by the gnawing guilt of abandoning her duties for personal happiness. The dreary, wet weather in London exacerbated her feelings of guilt, as illness and poverty surged among the poor she usually tended to. She could not reconcile her decision to spend money on herself with the needs of the suffering masses she left behind. Nor could she meet the vicar's eye, knowing she was concealing her plans from him and everyone else. In contrast, Mrs. Wilkins harbored no such doubts about her decision. She was convinced of the righteousness of taking a holiday, believing it a necessary act of self-care. "Think how much nicer we shall be when we come back," she would reassure Mrs. Arbuthnot, attempting to lift her spirits. Despite her certainty, Mrs. Wilkins was not immune to fear. The month was fraught with anxiety as she prepared for her departure, her husband blissfully unaware of her plans. Ironically, her efforts to please Mr. Wilkins with his favorite meals inadvertently led to a complication. So pleased was he with her culinary attentiveness that he proposed an Easter trip to Italy himself, expecting gratitude and excitement. However, Mrs. Wilkins was struck speechless by the coincidence, having planned to inform him of her trip in just a week's time. Mr. Wilkins, dismayed by her lack of enthusiasm, persisted in his offer, assuming she had not heard him. When she finally stammered out her own invitation to Italy, his disbelief turned to indignation. An afternoon of cross-examination ensued, with Mr. Wilkins demanding she retract her acceptance. He was only convinced of the trip's legitimacy upon meeting Mrs. Arbuthnot, whose presence seemed to validate the situation despite her inner turmoil over the half-truths she had presented. As March drew to a close, both women were left feeling guilty and conflicted. Their departure on the 30th was devoid of the anticipated excitement, overshadowed by the sense of wrongdoing. "We've been too good, much too good," Mrs. Wilkins lamented at Victoria Station, grappling with the paradox of their situation. Mrs. Arbuthnot remained silent about her husband, Frederick, who was absorbed in his work and unaware of her departure. She left him a note, knowing he would not object to her absence, and entrusted their home to the care of their efficient parlour-maid. The journey itself was daunting, with a stormy crossing to Calais that left them both seasick. Yet, as they disembarked and the reality of their adventure began to take hold, a sense of liberation washed over them. Mrs. Wilkins was the first to feel this, and her newfound joy spread to Mrs. Arbuthnot, lifting the veil of guilt that had shrouded their spirits. As they traveled through France and into Italy, the oppressive weight of their previous lives began to fade. By the time they reached their destination, the troubles of London were reduced to a distant memory, and the promise of San Salvatore beckoned like a beacon of hope and renewal. Their arrival at San Salvatore marked the beginning of a transformative experience, setting the stage for the arrival of Lady Caroline and Mrs. Fisher. The enchanting Italian spring awaited them, promising to unravel new chapters in their lives as they embraced the beauty and tranquility of their secluded paradise. Chapter 5. Italy had greeted Mrs. Arbuthnot and Mrs. Wilkins with an unexpected embrace of rain, a stark contrast to the brilliant sunshine they had imagined. Yet, the allure of Italy remained unscathed despite the downpour. The rain seemed somehow different from the English kind, more dignified, as if it fell with purpose rather than as a chaotic torrent. With every passing station, their excitement heightened, culminating in their arrival at Mezzago near midnight, 4 hours later than planned. Mr. Briggs, the owner of their destination, the enchanting San Salvatore, had assured them they would find transportation upon arrival. However, he had not accounted for the Italian train's notorious tardiness. The usual array of flies had long since retreated for the night, leaving the women stranded in the rain. Their salvation came in the form of Domenico, San Salvatore's gardener, who had anticipated the situation and sent a fly driven by his cousin Beppo. In the murky darkness, Beppo emerged, a figure of energy and Italian verbosity, with a slouched hat and a demeanor that could be mistaken for anything but respectable. He seized their suitcases and led them towards a small, high fly. The horse, evidently having its own ideas, attempted an unsupervised departure, only to be halted by Beppo's swift intervention. His reassurances, delivered with a flood of Italian and expressive gestures, were lost on the women, who clung to the single phrase they understood: San Salvatore. As they ventured onto the winding road, flanked by the ominous sea on one side and towering rocks on the other, apprehension settled over them. The darkness seemed to amplify their fears, and the unfamiliar landscape loomed with possibilities both romantic and perilous. Mrs. Arbuthnot and Mrs. Wilkins exchanged whispers of concern, uncertain of their direction, as Beppo occasionally turned to address them, confident in his assumption that sheer volume could transcend the language barrier. Their anxiety grew with every twist of the road, exacerbated by Beppo's misinterpretation of their gestures. A sudden burst of speed sent the fly hurtling through the night, their hearts racing with the clattering wheels. However, just as abruptly as it began, the horse slowed to a crawl on an incline, bringing a temporary sense of relief. Beppo, filled with pride, turned once more to receive their admiration, oblivious to their wide-eyed silence. As they entered the village of Castagneto, the fly stopped suddenly, and a group of figures materialized to whisk away their suitcases. The women, bewildered, could only echo their sole Italian phrase in protest. Yet despite their fears, there was no menace in the proceedings, only the inscrutable efficiency of local custom. As the men opened their umbrellas for them, Mrs. Wilkins and Mrs. Arbuthnot found a glimmer of hope in the gesture and followed their guide down a series of steps. The path wound upwards through an intoxicating profusion of unseen flowers, their fragrance rising with the rain. Slowly, their faith in their journey was restored, each step bringing them closer to their elusive castle. Upon reaching the top, they were greeted by the glow of electric light spilling from San Salvatore. The sight of their suitcases waiting for them was a relief that nearly brought them to tears. Standing on the ancient stones of the castle, they embraced the reality of their adventure. Mrs. Wilkins, in a moment of tender triumph, initiated the first event in their new sanctuary, a kiss shared with Mrs. Arbuthnot, sealing their arrival with a gesture of newfound companionship. Domenico, ever the gracious host, welcomed them with a speech that, while incomprehensible, was heartwarming in its sincerity. As the women stood arm in arm, weariness mingling with exhilaration, they knew their journey had only just begun. The warmth of their friendship and the promise of their Italian retreat awaited them, the first light of a new day on the horizon. Chapter 6. When Mrs. Wilkins awoke that morning, she lay in her bed for a few moments, savoring the anticipation of what she might see when she opened the shutters. Her room, reminiscent of a monastic cell with white walls and simple furnishings, felt like a sanctuary, a place where she could be utterly herself. This was her room, a space bought with her own savings, and for the first time in years she found herself alone, without the presence of her husband, Mellersh. The absence felt deliciously liberating. She finally jumped out of bed, threw on her slippers, and eagerly ran to the window. The moment she opened the shutters, she was greeted by a scene of breathtaking beauty. The Italian sun bathed the landscape in a golden glow. The sea lay calm, a mirror to the sky, and the mountains beyond were painted in pastel hues. Below her window stood a majestic cypress tree, dark and stately against the vibrant backdrop. Mrs. Wilkins could hardly contain her joy. She felt as if she had been reborn into a world that was too beautiful to be real. As she dressed, she marveled at her surroundings and at the sense of freedom that came from being away from the burdens of her life in Hampstead. She felt lighter, unburdened by the expectations and responsibilities that had weighed on her. Even the thought of Mellersh, left behind to grumble in the rain, could not dim her spirits. Instead, she felt a profound gratitude for the beauty and peace she found herself in. Intent on sharing her joy, Mrs. Wilkins decided to check on Mrs. Arbuthnot, her companion in this Italian adventure. She crossed the stone-floored hall, which was filled with the scent of nasturtiums and the sight of a Judas tree in full bloom outside the window. This was a place unlike any she had ever known, filled with the promise of a month of peace and beauty. Mrs. Arbuthnot was similarly entranced by the setting. She had awoken with a rare feeling of contentment, free from the usual dreams of her husband Frederick and the emotional turmoil they brought. When Mrs. Wilkins found her, she was gazing out of her window, lost in the beauty of the morning. "We are in God's hands," Mrs. Wilkins declared, her voice filled with awe. Mrs. Arbuthnot turned to her, momentarily concerned. "I hope nothing has happened," she asked anxiously. Mrs. Wilkins laughed, her joy bubbling over. "No, nothing has happened. It's just so wonderful here." Together, they stood at the window, arm in arm, absorbing the view. Their conversation was light and filled with the shared wonder of their surroundings. They decided to explore the garden further, drawn by the sight of a striking pink tree. As they wandered through the garden, they were surprised to come upon Lady Caroline, already arrived, sitting gracefully on a wall with her feet nestled among the lilies. She was a vision in white, the sunlight accentuating her beauty. Her presence added an unexpected layer of charm to the morning. Lady Caroline, or Scrap, as she was known among friends, had arrived earlier than expected, seeking solitude and the freedom of choosing her own rooms. She had managed to avoid the company of Mrs. Fisher, another guest who shared her journey, by taking separate transport to San Salvatore. Despite her intentions to keep to herself, she found herself drawn into a polite exchange with Mrs. Wilkins and Mrs. Arbuthnot. The two women were taken aback by Lady Caroline's beauty, which seemed even more pronounced in the natural light. Mrs. Wilkins, unreservedly admiring, commented on her loveliness, surprising Lady Caroline with her candidness. The interaction was pleasant, though Lady Caroline privately hoped for a month of peace, away from admirers and social obligations. Despite her attempts to remain aloof, Lady Caroline's natural charm and the warmth of the setting seemed to invite friendliness, even from those she wished to keep at a distance. Her plans for quiet contemplation began to seem tenuous in the face of such genuine, if unexpected, companionship. As the morning progressed, the women settled into their new routines, each finding their place in the enchanting surroundings of San Salvatore. The promise of a month filled with beauty and tranquility stretched ahead of them, offering respite and the possibility of transformation. Yet, the arrival of Mrs. Fisher loomed on the horizon, promising to bring a different dynamic to their idyllic retreat. Her presence would introduce new challenges and opportunities for each of them as they navigated the complexities of shared space and individual desires in their Italian haven. Chapter 7. In the tranquil embrace of San Salvatore, the morning sun spilled its golden light over the lush gardens and the azure sea, casting an ethereal glow on the ancient Italian villa. Mrs. Wilkins and Mrs. Arbuthnot, both swept up by the villa's enchantment, made their way to breakfast with an air of anticipatory delight. However, their plans of orchestrating a warm welcome for their fellow guest, Mrs. Fisher, were dashed when they discovered her already seated at the head of the dining table, calmly consuming her breakfast. Mrs. Wilkins, ever the expressive one, exclaimed at the unexpected sight, likening it to having the bread taken out of one's mouth. Mrs. Arbuthnot, more reserved, managed only a soft "oh" in surprise. Mrs. Fisher, a woman of formidable presence and history, acknowledged them with a simple "how do you do?" and continued with her breakfast, her demeanor as unyielding as a fortress. The villa, with its charming Italian architecture and history, was a place of beauty and respite. Yet the dynamics at the table hinted at an underlying tension. Mrs. Fisher, who had arrived a day earlier with Lady Caroline, exuded an air of ownership over the villa. Her mannerisms were those of someone who was accustomed to having her way, and she seemed to relish the quiet authority she held over the breakfast arrangements. Mrs. Arbuthnot, reflecting on their shared journey to San Salvatore, couldn't help but feel a sense of ownership herself. After all, it was she and Mrs. Wilkins who had discovered the villa and extended the invitation to Mrs. Fisher. Yet, as Mrs. Fisher presided over the breakfast table, orchestrating the meal with a practiced hand, it was clear that she had no intention of being a mere guest. Mrs. Wilkins, buoyed by the overwhelming beauty and tranquility of her surroundings, found herself less inclined to be bothered by Mrs. Fisher's commandeering presence. The villa was, after all, nothing short of paradise, with its fragrant gardens teeming with freesias, a luxury she could never afford in London. The mere thought of having freesias in abundance, coupled with the glorious sunshine, was enough to keep her in a state of blissful contentment. Despite the initial disappointment of not being able to surprise Mrs. Fisher with their preparations, the two women settled into breakfast, the sun streaming through the east-facing windows and filling the room with warmth. The atmosphere, though tinged with the undercurrents of Mrs. Fisher's unspoken authority, was serene, and the beauty of the villa was a balm to their weary spirits. Mrs. Fisher, for her part, remained largely unmoved by the exuberance of Mrs. Wilkins or the quiet presence of Mrs. Arbuthnot. Her thoughts were occupied with the memories of the illustrious figures she had known, the weight of their names lending her a sense of unassailable respectability. To her, the younger women's lack of references and their apparent disregard for propriety were matters of little consequence. She was firmly ensconced in the comfort of her own dignity. As the conversation meandered through the topics of beds and breakfast habits, Mrs. Fisher maintained her air of authority, deftly steering the dialogue to suit her preferences. Her insistence on the arrangement of the bedrooms, ensuring her own comfort, was a subtle assertion of her dominance, one that neither Mrs. Wilkins nor Mrs. Arbuthnot felt inclined to challenge. The breakfast concluded with Mrs. Fisher rising, her stick in hand, ready to continue her exploration of the villa and its surroundings. Mrs. Arbuthnot, ever gracious, offered assistance, but Mrs. Fisher, demonstrating a surprising agility, declined. Mrs. Wilkins, content with her orange and her newfound freedom from domestic duties, remained at the table, basking in the warmth of the morning sun. With the villa's routines established and Mrs. Fisher's preferences made clear, the three women found themselves settling into a rhythm of sorts. The villa, with its timeless charm and breathtaking views, promised a season of rejuvenation and reflection, unburdened by the complexities of their lives back in England. As Mrs. Fisher made her way to the garden, her thoughts lingered on the weeks ahead. Despite the peculiarities of her companions, she found a certain peace in the seclusion of San Salvatore, a place removed from the demands of her past and the expectations of society. For the time being, at least, she was content to let the villa's enchantment weave its spell. Meanwhile, Mrs. Wilkins and Mrs. Arbuthnot, now alone, exchanged a look of shared amusement and relief. The prospect of spending their days in such an idyllic setting, free from the constraints of their usual responsibilities, filled them with a sense of liberation. With the sun high in the sky and the garden calling, they too rose, ready to embrace the quiet magic of their Italian retreat. And so, as the day unfolded in a tapestry of light and shadow, the women of San Salvatore began to discover the true enchantment of their April sojourn, a journey that would take them far beyond the borders of their own expectations and into the heart of something wondrously transformative. As they stepped into the garden, their laughter mingling with the gentle rustling of the olive trees, little did they know that the days ahead would bring unexpected revelations and a deepening of bonds that would forever alter the course of their lives. Chapter 8. As the sun climbed higher over the Italian Riviera, casting a warm glow over the gardens of San Salvatore, Mrs. Wilkins and Mrs. Arbuthnot strolled through the lush landscape, untethered from their usual responsibilities. Mrs. Wilkins, with her newfound serenity, remarked to her companion, "Don't you see that if somebody else does the ordering, it frees us?" Mrs. Arbuthnot, pensive amidst the vibrant flora, nodded, though she couldn't shake off the feeling that they were relinquishing too much control. "I see your point, but it feels rather silly to have everything taken out of our hands," she replied. With a carefree laugh, Mrs. Wilkins countered, "I love things to be taken out of my hands." As they descended the stone steps, enveloped by a cascade of periwinkles and the heady scent of the wisteria, an image straight from the enticing advertisement that had drawn them here, Mrs. Arbuthnot marveled at the scene. The garden was a riot of colors. Scarlet geraniums and marigolds blazed in the sun, while snapdragons and nasturtiums competed in a vivid display. Beyond the terraces, the sea shimmered, reflecting the beauty of the cherry and peach blossoms amidst the silvery olive trees. The sheer beauty of it all softened Mrs. Arbuthnot's earlier discontent. In this paradise, even the overbearing presence of Mrs. Fisher seemed trivial. She sighed, a whisper of longing escaping her lips. "You mustn't sigh in heaven," Mrs. Wilkins chided gently, her voice laced with a playful reprimand. "One doesn't." "I was thinking how one longs to share this with those one loves," Mrs. Arbuthnot confessed, her thoughts drifting to her husband Frederick, and the days when they had shared such visions together, united in love and joy. Mrs. Wilkins, ever the optimist, insisted, "You mustn't long in heaven. You're supposed to be quite complete there." She gestured at the garden's harmonious chaos. "See how everything has been let in together. The dandelions and the irises, the vulgar and the superior, me and Mrs. Fisher, all welcome, all mixed up anyhow, and also visibly happy and enjoying ourselves." Amused, Mrs. Arbuthnot glanced at Mrs. Fisher, who seemed impervious to the beauty around her. Mrs. Fisher doesn't seem happy. Not visibly, anyhow, she observed with a smile. She'll begin soon, you'll see, Mrs. Wilkins assured, confident that the beauty of San Salvatore would eventually penetrate even the toughest exterior. Mrs. Arbuthnot was skeptical. After a certain age, people don't begin anything. But Mrs. Wilkins was unyielding in her belief that the perfect beauty of their surroundings would work its magic. I'm quite sure that we've got to heaven, and once Mrs. Fisher realizes that that's where she is, she's bound to be different. We shall get quite fond of her. As they laughed at the thought of Mrs. Fisher embracing this newfound exuberance, Lady Caroline, known as Scrap, watched them from her perch on the wall. She was relieved that their merriment was confined to the garden below. The thought of enduring their laughter up close was unsettling, especially in the morning. The idea of sharing her sanctuary with such genial women was a grave concern. She hoped they would continue their walk, leaving her in peace. But their laughter persisted, echoing through the garden, and Scrap couldn't help but feel the weight of their cheerfulness. As Mrs. Wilkins and Mrs. Arbuthnot meandered away, Scrap considered her own desire for solitude. The garden atop the wall was a haven, a place of fragrant freesias and lilies, with breathtaking views in every direction. Her longing for isolation was palpable, and she resolved to claim this space as her own, away from the prying eyes and persistent interruptions of others. Meanwhile, Mrs. Wilkins and Mrs. Arbuthnot made their way down the olive terraces to the sea, where they relished the simple pleasure of dangling their feet in the water. Their hearts were light, and they talked no more of heaven. Instead, they became silent vessels of contentment, basking in the tranquility of the moment. In the quietude of the garden, Lady Caroline lit a cigarette and contemplated her situation. The presence of the cook, Costanza, seeking orders for meals, was another unwanted intrusion. Scrap was determined to distance herself from such mundane concerns. She had not come to San Salvatore to manage a household, and she would not be drawn into it now. Costanza's admiration for Scrap's beauty was evident, and her enthusiastic suggestions for extravagant meals were met with resistance. Scrap, mindful of the others' potentially limited means, countermanded the cream and chickens, asserting her detachment from the role of decision-maker. She dismissed Costanza with a grace that belied her irritation, insisting that future orders be directed to the others. As Scrap tried to assert her independence, she pondered the solitude she craved. Even Domenico, the charming gardener, could not escape her desire to be left alone. His hovering presence was a reminder of how difficult it was to find true peace. She longed to think, to reflect, to make something of herself in this brief reprieve from the noise of her life, a noise that, to her surprise, had begun to feel like a clamor over nothing. As the gentle waves lapped at the shore and the garden lay in serene beauty, the women of San Salvatore each wrestled with their own transformations. The enchantment of the Italian spring was working its subtle magic, promising revelations and changes as the days unfolded. And as the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the garden, the stage was set for the next chapter, where the intertwining lives of these women would continue to unfold, shaped by the beauty and mystery of their enchanted April. Chapter 9. In the sunlit serenity of San Salvatore, Mrs. Fisher found herself ensconced in a sitting room that resonated with charm and character. The room was a tapestry of pale honey walls, amber-inlaid furniture, and books bound in ivory and lemon hues. A vast window offered a breathtaking view of the sea stretching towards Genoa, while a glass door led to the battlements, a place she hoped would be her private sanctuary. The battlements, adorned with flower-ringed stone troughs, seemed perfect for quiet contemplation, if only they could remain hers alone. Mrs. Fisher worried about the second glass door which connected to the round drawing room. Both she and Lady Caroline had dismissed it as too dim, deeming it suitable for the Hampstead women, Mrs. Wilkins and Mrs. Arbuthnot. The potential for intrusion on her desired solitude perturbed Mrs. Fisher. Privacy was her right, she mused, reflecting on the superior quality of the past compared to the present. London friends, kindred spirits of her own era, shared her nostalgia for bygone greatness, a stark contrast to the trivial youth surrounding her now. Determined to secure her solitude, Mrs. Fisher devised a plan. She instructed Francesca, the Italian housemaid, to shutter the glass door, and then directed the placement of a cabinet across it, ensuring that any attempt to open it from the inside would be discouraged. On the outside, one of the flower-filled sarcophagi was strategically placed by Domenico, the gardener, effectively blocking any ingress. "No one," Domenico hesitated, "will be able to use the door." "No one," Mrs. Fisher asserted with satisfaction, "will wish to." With her battlements now safeguarded, Mrs. Fisher settled into her room, her gaze resting on her reclaimed domain. The arrangement was not only more affordable than a hotel stay, but if she managed to ward off the others, infinitely more pleasant. She was paying a modest sum for her rooms, including the battlements, watchtower, and all. Where else could she live so well for so little? Her thoughts drifted to the practicalities of their shared arrangement. While her own financial situation was comfortable, Mrs. Fisher prided herself on her thriftiness. Concerned about potential extravagance in their shared meals, she considered suggesting a weekly financial contribution to Lady Caroline to cover expenses, ensuring that any unspent money would be returned and any excess absorbed by the caterer. As she basked in her private reflections, the sound of the gong brought her back to the present. Lunch awaited, and Mrs. Fisher, not one to set a poor example, hurried to join the others. Yet, as she arrived at the dining room, she found it empty save for Francesca, who stood ready with a dish of glistening macaroni. "Serve me," Mrs. Fisher commanded, her tone brooking no delay. Francesca, who found Mrs. Fisher the least likable of the quartet, complied reluctantly. Mrs. Fisher, for her part, struggled with the macaroni. The slippery strands evoked memories of her late husband, Mr. Fisher, whose behavior had been as elusive and undignified as the pasta. With little patience for the wriggling dish, she resorted to cutting it with a knife, a breach of etiquette she felt was justified. Francesca watched gloomily as Mrs. Fisher dealt with the macaroni in a manner that offended her Italian sensibilities. But Mrs. Fisher was unfazed, reflecting on how Browning, the poet, had managed macaroni with enviable skill during a luncheon with her father. Her reminiscence was interrupted by Francesca, who, concerned about the cold macaroni, suggested fetching the absent Lady Caroline. Lady Caroline, known to the others as Scrap, was basking in the sun, her flaxen hair a halo in the Italian light. She had no desire to join the meal, preferring solitude over the company of her housemates. Francesca's attempts to coax her with the promise of macaroni were met with sweetly delivered yet firm rebuffs. "I do not wish to come to meals," Scrap informed Francesca, her tone as melodious as her words were decisive. Inside, Mrs. Arbuthnot and Mrs. Wilkins finally arrived, apologizing for their tardiness. Mrs. Arbuthnot, concerned for Lady Caroline, suggested offering her tea or coffee, unaware that Scrap's claim of a headache was a polite fiction. Mrs. Wilkins, however, saw through the pretense, asserting that what Scrap truly wanted was peace. Mrs. Fisher, meanwhile, was less concerned with Scrap's well-being and more with the disruption to their dining routine. She recalled how Carlyle, the great philosopher, would have prescribed castor oil for such ailments, a remedy she considered might be more effective than tea. As the conversation continued, Mrs. Wilkins explained to Mrs. Arbuthnot that Scrap only wanted to be left alone, attributing this to a theory about the transformative power of their Italian retreat. This theory, though intriguing, was met with skepticism by Mrs. Fisher, who had little patience for Mrs. Wilkins's whimsies. The meal progressed, yet Francesca persisted in offering the macaroni, much to Mrs. Fisher's chagrin. Despite her best efforts to maintain decorum and order within the villa, she realized that the dynamics of San Salvatore were not easily controlled. Her companions, each with their own quirks and desires, added layers of complexity to her quest for tranquility. As lunch drew to a close, Mrs. Fisher's thoughts turned to the upcoming afternoon. Would her battlements remain undisturbed? Would the macaroni fiasco repeat itself? The answers lay just beyond the horizon, in the unfolding tapestry of life at San Salvatore, where the past and present intertwined in the warm Italian sun. Chapter 10. In the secluded top garden of San Salvatore, a place so designed that escape or concealment was nearly impossible, Lady Caroline Dester, known as Scrap, sought solitude. This garden, bordered by low parapets and sparse foliage, offered little privacy, except in one corner where a thick clump of daphne provided cover. Scrap, seeking refuge from the world, settled into this hidden alcove, hoping to be left alone. However, her solitude was short-lived. Mrs. Fisher, a formidable presence with a nose for cigarette smoke and a determination to do good, discovered Scrap by following the scent of her cigarette. Mrs. Fisher, a woman shaped by the traditions of a bygone era, had a voice reminiscent of a man's, deep and authoritative, and she approached Scrap with the intent to offer advice, as she believed the young woman was unwell. Scrap, feigning sleep, was betrayed by the cigarette still poised in her fingers. Mrs. Fisher, now seated beside her, began to dispense her unsolicited counsel, suggesting a dose of castor oil as a remedy for Scrap's supposed ailment. Scrap, accustomed to admiration and the attention her beauty commanded, found herself at a loss with Mrs. Fisher's straightforward and unyielding demeanor. "You ought to go to bed," Mrs. Fisher insisted, her voice as firm as her resolve to help. Scrap, her voice enchanting and full of wistful defiance, declared, "I never go to bed," echoing the memorable line of Poor Joe from Bleak House, a reference that stirred nostalgic memories in Mrs. Fisher. Scrap's voice, a symphony of allure and melancholy, had always been her most potent tool, a gift that ensnared the hearts of men, making her the object of universal desire. Yet this very gift had become a burden. Her life, filled with adulation, had turned into a cycle of unwanted attentions and the relentless pursuit of her affections by men of all walks of life. The war had been a turning point for Scrap, robbing her of the one man she could have considered marrying, and leaving her embittered by the incessant focus on love. Her beauty and voice had become chains, and she longed for release from the expectations and the endless cycle of romantic advances. Mrs. Fisher, oblivious to the complexities of Scrap's inner turmoil, continued her practical advice, suggesting that what Scrap needed was a husband and children. Scrap, however, was in search of something more profound, a conclusion, a sense of purpose beyond the superficial roles society offered her. The conversation with Mrs. Fisher sparked a glimmer of hope in Scrap. Perhaps at San Salvatore, away from the shadows of her family's illustrious name and the unyielding gaze of admirers, she might find clarity. She realized that Mrs. Fisher and the others might not recognize her, offering her a rare chance to shed her identity and discover who she truly was. As Mrs. Fisher departed, leaving Scrap to her thoughts, Scrap felt a rare sense of relief. Here, in this Italian haven, she might finally escape the demands and expectations that had defined her life. She could contemplate her future, free from the distractions of her past. Meanwhile, Mrs. Fisher, her patience tested by the perceived frivolity of youth, returned to her sitting room only to find Mrs. Arbuthnot and Mrs. Wilkins comfortably settled there, each engaged with their own tasks. Mrs. Arbuthnot was sipping coffee, content in her new surroundings, while Mrs. Wilkins was writing a letter to her husband, Mellersh, sharing the news of her safe arrival at San Salvatore. The scene in the sitting room underscored a recurring theme at San Salvatore, a place where each woman, in her own way, sought transformation and solace from their daily lives. As they navigated the complexities of their relationships and personal challenges, the villa offered them a canvas on which to redefine themselves, far from the constraints of their former lives. As the afternoon sun began to dip behind the hills, casting a warm glow over the garden, the women of San Salvatore each contemplated the possibilities of a new beginning, unaware of how their lives would intertwine and influence each other in unexpected ways in the days to come. This moment marked the quiet inception of change, a prelude to the transformations that lay ahead. Chapter 11. San Salvatore, a serene haven overflowing with beauty and tranquility, seemed to breathe peace into whoever stepped into its embrace. Its walls and gardens were alive with the sweet aroma of flowers that whispered calmness to the soul. Yet, amidst this Eden-like setting, Mrs. Fisher, an older woman clinging to her London ways, appeared immune to its charms. She was determined to claim a corner of this paradise for herself, barricading her chosen sitting room with her presence and belongings as if to ward off any intruders. Mrs. Wilkins, however, was not one to shy away from addressing things head-on. She smiled gently as she spoke to Mrs. Fisher, observing, "You don't like us being in here. Why?" Mrs. Fisher, leaning on her stick, replied, "I should have thought you could see that it is my room." Mrs. Wilkins, with an air of cheerful understanding, noted the photographs and notepaper as signs of Mrs. Fisher's territorial claim. "You mean because of the photographs?" she noted, and acknowledged the pen in her hand was Mrs. Fisher's, placing it back on the table with an apology. Mrs. Arbuthnot, standing beside her friend, was taken aback by Mrs. Fisher's insistence, but was gently interrupted by Mrs. Wilkins, who seemed to dismiss the idea of quarrel over space with a wave of goodwill. Mrs. Fisher, feeling her authority challenged by Mrs. Wilkins's unperturbed demeanor, reiterated her need for solitude with a hint of exasperation. "I'm an old woman, and I need a room to myself," she stated, her words edged with a touch of longing for the quietude she had anticipated. The two younger women, understanding her need, made to leave, Mrs. Wilkins gently steering Mrs. Arbuthnot towards the door, promising Mrs. Fisher they would respect her wish for solitude. "We're only too glad for you to have this room if it makes you happy," she assured, her smile unyielding even as they retreated. Once outside, Mrs. Wilkins, with a lightness that seemed to come from within, suggested they explore the village. As they walked, the conversation turned towards their husbands, particularly Mellersh, Mrs. Wilkins's own. Her thoughts had shifted, softened by the sun-drenched beauty around her, and she found herself contemplating her previous actions with a new perspective. "I've been thinking about Mellersh," she confessed, as they descended the steep path, one behind the other. Her voice carried a note of self-reflection, surprising even her as she spoke of the holiday Mellersh had planned, which she had so eagerly evaded. Rose, caught off guard by this revelation, listened with a mixture of curiosity and reluctance. The idea of husbands, the very people they had escaped to forget for a while, being invited into their newfound paradise seemed a contradiction. Yet, Lottie, with an impetuousness that bordered on saintly, insisted it was only fair to share their good fortune with those they loved. "I've invited him to come and stay with us," Lottie announced, her eyes shining with earnestness. Rose, astounded by her friend's rapid change of heart, could only listen as Lottie justified her decision with a heartfelt sincerity that spoke volumes of her newfound happiness. The conversation danced between them, Lottie's words brimming with warmth and a contagious enthusiasm. She spoke of love and generosity, of shedding stinginess and embracing the abundance of affection San Salvatore seemed to inspire in her. Rose, listening, felt a pang of longing for her own husband Frederick, realizing that Lottie's words stirred in her a desire to share this beauty with him too. As Lottie continued her journey to the village, Rose chose to sit a while, her thoughts a whirl of emotions. She envied Lottie's ability to forgive and move forward, to embrace the joy of the present without reservation. Her heart ached with the memory of Frederick, the love they once shared, and the silence that had grown between them. In the quiet of San Salvatore's garden, Rose pondered her own path, wondering if she too could find the courage to reach out across the chasm of silence to Frederick. Lottie's voice echoed in her mind, "Invite him at once," urging her to take a step towards healing. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the garden, a sense of possibility began to stir within Rose. The path ahead seemed fraught with uncertainty, but perhaps, just perhaps, San Salvatore held the promise of renewal for her too. And so, as Lottie made her way to the village, carrying her letter to Mellersh, Rose sat in contemplation, feeling the gentle tug of a decision yet to be made. Would she dare to reach out to Frederick, to invite him into this world of beauty and peace? The question lingered in the air, a bridge to the unfolding stories that awaited them all in the chapters to come. Chapter 12. In the heart of the Italian Riviera, nestled within the enchanting walls of San Salvatore, the four women of different walks of life came together for their first dinner as a complete group. Lady Caroline Dester, affectionately known as Scrap, graced the dinner table in a shell-pink tea gown that clung to her with an almost sentient admiration. This attire, described by Scrap with nonchalance as an old rag, was anything but ordinary, captivating Mrs. Wilkins across the table with its elegance. "What a beautiful dress!" Mrs. Wilkins exclaimed, her eyes alight with admiration. Scrap, with a dismissive glance at her attire, replied, "What, this old rag? I've had it 100 years," before returning to her soup, seemingly uninterested in the admiration it garnered. Mrs. Fisher, the matriarchal presence among them, disapproved of Scrap's choice. "You must be very cold in it," she remarked, her voice tinged with the authority of propriety, for the gown revealed more of Scrap than it concealed. The exchange continued, with Mrs. Arbuthnot expressing concern over Scrap catching a chill, a concern Scrap easily dismissed. Mrs. Fisher, ever the guardian of decorum, found Scrap's attire not only improper but inconsiderate, fearing it would lead to a chill that might spread through their small party. Mrs. Wilkins, whose thoughts often wandered into whimsical territories, pondered the notion of impropriety without the presence of men, a remark that Scrap, with a faint, dimpled smile, found faintly amusing. Mrs. Wilkins, with her luminous personality, seemed to draw Scrap's attention in a way that others rarely did, her face a canvas of ever-changing emotions. As the meal progressed, Mrs. Wilkins, her excitement undiminished, declared her day to have been wonderful, a proclamation met with indifference by Mrs. Fisher, who lowered her eyes in disapproval of Mrs. Wilkins's unrestrained enthusiasm. Yet Scrap listened with a degree of interest, her mind wandering not to the trivialities of fashion, but to the complexities of human relationships. Mrs. Fisher, maintaining her disapproval, observed Scrap's liberal consumption of Chianti, a habit she deemed unseemly, particularly for one of Scrap's age and beauty. The conversation then took a turn toward the unexpected, with Mrs. Wilkins announcing her intention to invite her husband Mellersh to join them at San Salvatore. Mrs. Fisher, alarmed at the prospect of a male presence disrupting their sanctuary, questioned Mrs. Wilkins directly. "What is his name?" she asked, her tone brusque. "Wilkins," replied Mrs. Wilkins, her response as straightforward as her intentions. Mrs. Fisher's incredulity was palpable, her assumption that the two Hampstead women were widows shattered by this revelation. The mere mention of a husband seemed to upend Mrs. Fisher's carefully maintained sense of order, thrusting her into a contemplation of propriety and the sanctity of marriage. As the conversation unfolded, it became clear that Mrs. Wilkins's motives were driven by a newfound sense of happiness and a desire to share it with Mellersh. Her invitation, however, posed a logistical challenge, given the limited number of bedrooms at San Salvatore. Mrs. Fisher, considering the implications, began to contemplate inviting her own friend, Kate Lumley, to maintain a balance of propriety and prevent the monopolization of the house by the Wilkinses. Kate, a woman of her own period, would provide the companionship Mrs. Fisher sought, ensuring she would not be isolated among the younger women whose views and behaviors she found alien. The evening concluded with Mrs. Wilkins expressing her vision of Mellersh's presence, a vision met with a mix of skepticism and resignation by the others. Lady Caroline, with her characteristic detachment, remarked, "That settles Mellersh, then," acknowledging the decision with a certain inevitability. As night fell over the Tuscan landscape, the women of San Salvatore found themselves contemplating the complexities of their newfound freedom, the weight of societal expectations, and the inner transformations that their Italian sojourn was nudging to the surface. Mrs. Fisher, with her resolve to invite Kate Lumley, and Mrs. Wilkins, with her vision of a shared happiness, set the stage for the unfolding of personal journeys that would continue to shape their lives in the days to come. The quiet promise of morning whispered through the villa's ivy-clad walls, hinting at the secrets and revelations that awaited them in the sunlit hours ahead. Chapter 13. In the embrace of an Italian April, San Salvatore seemed to slumber, its picturesque castle drowsy under the sun's warm gaze. To the servants, the house was as quiet as winter's retreat, a stark contrast to the lively springs they had witnessed in the past. These 4 English ladies who had taken up residence appeared as though life barely rippled through them. No guests came for tea, no excursions were planned. The boat lay unused, and the house echoed only with the soft steps of their solitary wanderings. The absence of gentlemen was perplexing to the servants. How could men resist the allure of such beauty? Even with the subtraction of Mrs. Fisher, the elder of the group, the remaining ladies combined their charms into a formidable total. Yet they preferred solitude, Mrs. Fisher in her room, Mrs. Arbuthnot among the rocks, Lady Caroline basking in the garden, and Mrs. Wilkins exploring the hills. Each embraced the sunlit silence in her unique way. But beneath this surface tranquility, the ladies were far from idle. The vibrant air of San Salvatore stirred their minds, filled with dreams as light and vivid as the place itself. To the locals, such beauty was as invisible as the air they breathed. But for the visitors, escaping from London's gloom, the transformation was profound. Mrs. Wilkins, or Lottie as she was affectionately known, was the first to surrender to the enchantment. Her spirit soared, casting off the drabness of London life with unrestrained joy. Mrs. Arbuthnot Rose felt the change, too, though her response was more introspective, stirring thoughts she had long avoided. Lady Caroline, or Scrap, was no stranger to beauty, yet she found San Salvatore's charm irresistible, prompting an unexpected self-reflection. She pondered the word tawdry, surprised at its insistence in her thoughts. Was she truly so superficial? This new environment pressed her to consider such unsettling notions. The following morning, Scrap awoke with regret, troubled by her uncharacteristic openness with Lottie the night before. She feared Lottie's friendliness might lead to clinginess, a prospect she dreaded. But to her relief, she found the garden empty, granting her the solitude she craved. Alone, she could think clearly, unbothered by social expectations. Yet, as the day passed, Scrap found herself hungry and a bit miffed at being forgotten for lunch. She mused over Lottie's unusual kindness regarding sleeping arrangements for Mellersh, Lottie's husband, and considered it a breach of conduct not to call her for meals. But missing a meal, she concluded, was a small price for such peace. In her solitude, Scrap's thoughts drifted to Mr. Wilkins, Lottie's husband, who was soon to join them. The prospect filled her with a familiar dread. Experience had taught her that men's attention often became a burden, and she feared Mr. Wilkins would be no different. She worried about the potential disruption his presence might cause, both to her cherished solitude and to the blossoming camaraderie with Lottie. Meanwhile, Rose Arbuthnot spent her day in contemplative silence. The beauty around her only highlighted her internal void. Without the distraction of her parish duties, she was left alone with her thoughts, which inevitably turned to Frederick, her estranged husband. Lottie's suggestion to invite him had unsettled her, reviving old wounds and uncertainties about their relationship. Rose's religious devotion, once a cornerstone of her life, felt distant in this idyllic setting. She found herself unable to pray, her spiritual anchor seemingly adrift. The realization that she was alone in her appreciation of the beauty around her only deepened her melancholy. She longed for someone to share it with, someone to call dearest. As the day waned, Lottie returned, her spirits bright from a day in the sun. Her exuberance was infectious, lifting the mood at dinner. Yet, when she inquired about Rose's letter to Frederick, the table's atmosphere shifted. Rose's discomfort was palpable. Lottie's well-meaning but tactless question laid bare Rose's internal struggle. Mrs. Fisher observed these dynamics with a detached curiosity. The day's restlessness had left her unsettled, unable to focus on her beloved books. Even the thought of Kate Lumley's potential visit seemed less urgent in the face of her own inexplicable agitation. At tea, Scrap joined Mrs. Fisher and Rose, but without Lottie, the gathering felt flat. Rose's attempts to mother Scrap were met with polite resistance, reminiscent of the many well-meaning but suffocating attentions Scrap had endured throughout her life. Meanwhile, Rose grappled with her burgeoning sense of discontent, questioning her very nature. As evening fell, Lottie's infectious laughter filled the air, momentarily bridging the emotional distances between them. The conversation turned to their husbands, sparking a mix of curiosity and tension. Mrs. Fisher, ever the traditionalist, was irked by the modernity of these women's lives, yet her curiosity was piqued. The evening ended with a sense of camaraderie, despite the underlying tensions. Each woman was drawn into her own thoughts, pondering the transformations taking place within and around them. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting its last golden rays across the castle, the anticipation of what tomorrow might bring lingered in the air, hinting at the changes yet to unfold. Chapter 14. The garden at San Salvatore was a riot of color and scent, as if nature herself had decided to put on a spectacular show. The wisteria, which had been in full bloom earlier, was now fading, its petals gently carpeting the ground in soft hues of pink and purple. The Judas tree and peach blossoms had also shed their colorful cloaks, leaving behind a delicate rose-tinted layer on the earth. In their place, the garden was now dominated by the extravagant display of summer roses sprawling luxuriously over walls and trellises. Among these, Fortune's Yellow stood out, a particularly beautiful rose that seemed to glow with its own inner light. The tamarisk and daphnes were at their peak, and the lilies reached skyward, showing off their height with pride. It was into this paradise that Mr. Wilkins arrived, as his wife Lottie had foresaw. His acceptance of her invitation was marked by a certain eagerness, evidenced by his decision to telegraph rather than pen a letter. This action suggested a genuine desire for reunion, a sentiment that was not lost on Lady Caroline Dester, known as Scrap. Observing Lottie's radiant joy, Scrap mused that Mr. Wilkins would indeed be foolish to waste his time on anything other than enjoying his holiday and his wife's company. She was prepared to intervene if necessary, determined that if Mr. Wilkins failed to appreciate Lottie's newfound happiness, he might find himself metaphorically tipped over the battlements. By this time, Lottie and Scrap had become close friends, addressing each other by their first names. Lottie's unreserved nature had quickly broken down Scrap's initial caution, and the two women had formed a bond that was both unexpected and delightful. Despite Scrap's initial fears of being overwhelmed by Lottie's friendliness, she found herself charmed by Lottie's genuine warmth and lack of pretense. Lottie was often elusive, disappearing for hours to explore the gardens, returning with her hair full of moss and her freckles more pronounced than ever. It seemed she was making the most of her time before Mr. Wilkins's arrival, planning to devote herself to his company once he was there. Scrap watched Lottie with a curiosity she hadn't anticipated. It seemed astonishing to her that someone could be so content with such simple pleasures. San Salvatore was undeniably beautiful, and the weather was perfect, but Scrap had always needed more than just scenery and climate to find happiness. She pondered how Lottie, who would soon return to her life in Hampstead, could find such joy in this temporary escape. There was also the matter of Mellish's imminent arrival, the husband from whom Lottie had recently fled. Scrap couldn't help but wonder if Lottie's gestures of sharing and magnanimity were truly sustainable. Yet Lottie's happiness seemed genuine and effortless, leaving Scrap to question her own perceptions. As for Lottie, her fears about maintaining her newfound serenity in Mellish's presence evaporated by midweek. She felt secure in her happiness, confident that nothing could disturb her newfound peace. She envisioned herself and Mellish sitting together in this heaven, sharing laughter over past fears and insecurities. Mellish, she believed, would naturally be drawn into this blissful state, buoyed by the fragrant air and tranquil surroundings. Her mind, filled with poetic imagery, pictured Mellish adorned in celestial garments, a humorous but affectionate image that captured her hopes for their renewed relationship. She was certain he only needed a thorough airing. With this confidence in mind, Lottie awaited Mellish's arrival, which came at the end of the week. She did not meet him at the train station, much to Mrs. Fisher's disapproval. Mrs. Fisher, a stickler for propriety, believed a husband should be met with due ceremony, as she had always done for Mr. Fisher. But Lottie, indifferent to such conventions, simply walked down to meet Mellish as he arrived in the street of Castagneto. Her cheerful demeanor seemed to echo through the villa, prompting Scrap to smile, Rose to sigh, and Mrs. Fisher to retreat to her room for breakfast. Scrap, preferring to spend the day avoiding the new arrival, calculated that Mellish would be occupied with the elaborate ritual of the bath. San Salvatore's bathroom was a complex contraption, requiring the concerted effort of the entire staff to operate. It was an adventure to have a hot bath, involving wood, water, and a delicate balance of tap flow to prevent the stove from either extinguishing or exploding. Foreseeing that Mellish would spend much of the day engaged in this endeavor, Scrap felt secure in her, planned to enjoy the garden undisturbed. As Mellish's bath commenced with the usual commotion, Scrap prepared to slip out to her sanctuary. But the peaceful morning was shattered by an unexpected explosion, the very event the printed instructions had warned against. Mellish, startled out of his bath, rushed into the landing, colliding with Scrap in his haste. "That damned bath!" Mellish exclaimed, momentarily forgetting himself in the shock of the situation. Scrap, suppressing laughter at the sight of Mellish with only a towel for modesty, responded with a composed greeting, "How do you do?" Her tactful reaction restored a semblance of normalcy, allowing Mellish to introduce himself with as much dignity as he could muster under the circumstances. He was relieved and grateful for Scrap's understanding, attributing it to her aristocratic composure. Their unconventional introduction was interrupted by the arrival of the servants and Mrs. Fisher, who stood aghast at the scene before her. Scrap gracefully took charge, introducing Mellish to Mrs. Fisher, who was rooted in shock at the doorway. Mellersh, ever the gentleman, extended his hand in greeting, leaving wet footprints in his wake as he crossed the landing. Scrap, having successfully diffused the situation, retreated to the garden, leaving Mellersh to navigate the complexities of San Salvatore's domestic arrangements. The villa, with its idyllic setting and vibrant inhabitants, promised to be the backdrop for further transformations and revelations as each character continued their journey toward self-discovery and newfound happiness. The stage was set for the next chapter in their enchanted sojourn, where the idyllic beauty of San Salvatore and the complexities of human relationships would continue to intertwine. Chapter 15. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the villa's garden, the dinner table at San Salvatore was set aglow with a warm, inviting light. The evening, filled with a mixture of laughter and polite conversation, was a testament to the transformative power of the Italian retreat on its inhabitants. Mrs. Fisher and Lady Caroline, still amused by the morning's unexpected encounter with Mr. Wilkins in a state of undress, felt an unusual camaraderie with him. The shared experience of seeing him in such a vulnerable, humorous position had broken the ice in a way nothing else could have. Mrs. Fisher, normally a woman of strict propriety, found herself feeling quite indulgent towards Mr. Wilkins. She recalled how he had apologized profusely for the accidental display, handling the situation with such grace and humility that she couldn't help but feel a maternal kind of pride when she saw him later, impeccably dressed for dinner. His presence seemed to elevate the conversation, steering it towards topics of substance like politics and literature, and she was pleased to find herself in agreement with his opinions, particularly regarding the likes of Lloyd George. Lady Caroline, or Scrap as she was affectionately known, had initially been mortified by the incident, but found herself softened by Mr. Wilkins's genuine embarrassment and subsequent charm. There was something endearing about a man who could so easily laugh at himself, and she appreciated the lack of simpering flattery that usually accompanied her interactions with men. Instead, there was a refreshing straightforwardness to Mr. Wilkins that she found intriguing. Lottie, Mr. Wilkins' wife, observed these interactions with a sense of amazement. She had anticipated that San Salvatore might work its magic on her husband, but the speed and extent of his transformation were beyond her expectations. Mellersh, as she affectionately called him, had not only been pleasant in company, which was his usual demeanor when outside their home, but also privately affectionate, a rarity in their marriage. The gentle kiss he had bestowed upon her while she brushed her hair felt like a promise of better things to come. The evening unfolded smoothly, with Mr. Wilkins engaging each of the women in genuine conversation. His demeanor was polished, his humor subtle, and his interest in their lives sincere. Lottie, reveling in the newfound harmony, decided to keep her secret about the origins of their holiday, the nest egg and Rose's role as hostess, a little longer. Why disrupt the peace when Mellersh seemed so content? As the women observed Mr. Wilkins, they saw him not as a mere solicitor from London, but as someone who could belong to their world of beauty and leisure. The conversation flowed easily, touching upon the idyllic surroundings of the villa, the picturesque views, and the peaceful effect they had on one's soul. Scrap, who often retreated into her own world, found herself partaking in the discussion, her usual aloofness replaced by a warm, engaging presence. The dinner concluded with laughter and a sense of camaraderie that had eluded the group until now. The atmosphere at San Salvatore had subtly shifted, drawing them closer together. As they lingered over dessert, the gentle clinking of china and the soft murmur of voices became a symphony of companionship. The next morning dawned bright and clear, and with it came the reality of financial responsibilities. Lottie knew she couldn't postpone her confession any longer. The housekeeping bills needed to be settled, and with Rose out for a walk and both Mrs. Fisher and Lady Caroline uninterested in dealing with Costanza, the task fell to her. As she prepared to tell Mellersh the truth, the ease with which he accepted the revelation surprised her. Far from being upset, he seemed to take the news in stride, even suggesting that such a holiday was a worthy investment. Meanwhile, Mrs. Fisher, ever the practical woman, found herself embroiled in the complexities of the villa's expenses. Costanza's exuberant spending had led to a stack of bills that required immediate attention. Determined to put an end to the extravagance, Mrs. Fisher took matters into her own hands, instructing the cook to maintain the quality of meals while significantly cutting costs. Her firm yet fair approach left Costanza with little choice but to comply, albeit with a heavy heart. In the garden, Scrap found herself on the receiving end of Mrs. Fisher's grievances about the mismanaged housekeeping. Yet Scrap, with her serene demeanor and effortless charm, managed to diffuse the situation with grace, even offering to cover the expenses herself. Her gesture of goodwill, though met with some disapproval from Mrs. Fisher, was a testament to her generosity and the understanding that had begun to blossom among the women. As the day unfolded, Mr. Wilkins continued to adapt to the slower, more reflective pace of life at the villa. His interactions with the ladies were marked by a newfound respect and appreciation for their individual strengths and personalities. The villa, with its enchanting gardens and tranquil atmosphere, seemed to encourage this deeper connection. As the evening drew to a close, the residents of San Salvatore found themselves reflecting on the changes within themselves and their relationships. The villa had cast its spell, drawing them into a world where time seemed to slow and simple pleasures were savored. The laughter and camaraderie that had graced their dinner table were a promise of the days to come, a harmonious interlude in their lives where new friendships were forged and old fears were laid to rest. The tranquility of San Salvatore held them in its embrace, whispering secrets of contentment and companionship. And as the stars began to twinkle in the velvet sky, the promise of another day in paradise beckoned, with new adventures and deeper bonds waiting to unfold. Chapter 16. The second week at San Salvatore began with an unexpected harmony, as if the villa itself had woven a soothing spell over its inhabitants. The arrival of Mr. Mellersh Wilkins, whom 3 of the ladies had anticipated with some trepidation, only served to enhance the tranquility that had settled over the group. Lottie, buoyed by her unshakable belief in the restorative powers of the Italian retreat, found her faith vindicated. Mellersh did not disrupt. He harmonized. Determined to please and grateful to Lottie for the introduction to Lady Caroline, he displayed a newfound fondness for his wife, both publicly and privately. In his efforts to be amiable, Mellersh even indulged in gentle affection, surprising Lottie with his playful pinching of her ears, both ears, as though testing the limits of his endearment. The small bedroom they shared, initially a source of concern, became a stage for tender gestures of mutual consideration as they navigated the limited space with affectionate generosity. Mellersh's newfound vigor saw him embrace the brisk morning sea, eschewing the repaired bathroom for the invigorating embrace of the cold water. The dip left him refreshed and ready for the day, a transformation that didn't go unnoticed by the other residents of the villa. The atmospheric magic of San Salvatore seemed to work on everyone, as even Rose and Lady Caroline, or Scrap as she was affectionately known, felt a shift within themselves. Rose found herself reflecting on her marriage, acknowledging her part in the distance that had grown between her and Frederick. Inspired by Mellersh's transformation, she pondered whether the same enchantment could touch her husband if she invited him to join her in this idyllic setting. Love, she mused, was the foundation upon which everything of value was built. Perhaps in this place, love could find its way back to her. Meanwhile, Scrap entertained thoughts that surprised even herself, thoughts of gratitude and familial warmth that she had previously dismissed. The beauty and peace of San Salvatore were working their way into her heart, softening her usual detachment. Mrs. Fisher, on the other hand, found herself increasingly restless. The villa's vibrant atmosphere seemed to stir a forgotten vitality within her, a sensation she hadn't felt since her youth. It was as if she was on the verge of a personal renaissance, though she sternly resisted the notion, fearing it would betray the dignity she had so carefully cultivated over the years. Despite her unease, Mrs. Fisher found a surprising comfort in the company of Mr. Wilkins. His presence, though not constant, offered a distraction from her tumultuous thoughts. His attentiveness to all the ladies was noted, and it was clear he was determined to leave a favorable impression. His interactions with Scrap were particularly noteworthy. He managed to navigate her aloofness with a deft charm, earning her appreciation for his respectful demeanor. As the days of the second week unfolded, the villa's gardens mirrored the emotional blossoming of its residents. The landscape was a riot of color and fragrance, with wild gladiolus replacing the poet's-eyed narcissus, and a lilac bush bursting into unexpected bloom. Such an abundance of spring and summer all at once seemed like a dream, a tangible manifestation of the rejuvenation each guest was experiencing. Mr. Wilkins basked in the success of his holiday, the warmth between him and Lottie growing with each day. He was content, not even fretting about the cost of the trip, as he planned a surprise for Lottie by covering her expenses. The atmosphere of San Salvatore, once an experiment in Lottie's belief, had proven itself to be a catalyst for change, drawing out the best in everyone, including him. As the golden days slipped by, each as beautiful as the last, the tranquil spell of San Salvatore deepened. The beanfield scent drifted across the villa, mingling with the sweet fragrance of the garden blooms. Amidst this setting, the residents found themselves contemplating their pasts, their futures, and the connections they had forged in this enchanted April. With the second week drawing to a close, a sense of anticipation hung in the air. Rose, emboldened by her reflections, resolved to write to Frederick, inviting him to join her in the hopes that San Salvatore might work its magic once more. Mrs. Fisher, despite her resistance, continued to grapple with her burgeoning restlessness. And Mr. Wilkins, ever the treasure, remained vigilant, ready to offer his counsel to any who might seek it. As the week ended, the promise of new beginnings and deeper transformations lingered, setting the stage for what the third week might bring. The villa, with its spell-binding beauty, had more secrets to reveal, and its guests, now intertwined in their shared experience, were poised to discover them. Chapter 17. As the soft Italian sun bathed San Salvatore in its golden glow, Rose Arbuthnot found herself caught in a web of emotions, each thread pulling her toward a different fate. It was the first day of the third week, and with determination she had penned a letter to Frederick, her estranged husband. Fearing a change of heart, she entrusted the delivery to Domenico, the servant, ensuring it would be posted without delay. Yet, as soon as the letter left her hands, regret began to gnaw at her. She was convinced Frederick would neither come nor reply, and if he did, it would only be to offer polite excuses cloaked in falsehoods. The serene beauty of San Salvatore had become a breeding ground for idle thoughts and resurrected longings. Rose had been content in Hampstead, where work had been her fortress against the heartache of Frederick's absence. But here, in this warm, languid place, her carefully constructed defenses crumbled. She feared if Frederick did come, she would only bore him, a fear rooted in the realization of why he had distanced himself. Here, under the Italian sun, her insecurities blossomed alongside the vibrant flowers. Her friend Lottie, ever the optimist, was delighted when Rose finally confessed to sending the letter. "Now we shall be completely happy," Lottie exclaimed, wrapping her in an enthusiastic embrace. But for Rose, happiness seemed elusive, her face reflecting the weight of unspoken fears. Mr. Wilkins, Lottie's husband, noticed Rose's preoccupation and sought her out during his strolls. His presence was a surprise, for she had misjudged him back in Hampstead. Here he was a different man, softened by the Italian sun. He engaged her in conversation, a testament to the fact that, at least to someone, Rose was not a bore. Despite his kindness, Rose longed for solitude, her mind a tumult of unfamiliar emotions, vanity, irritability, and a pugnacious spirit that had never troubled her before. Desperate for solitude, Rose escaped to the rocks by the water's edge, a place that had offered solace on her first day at San Salvatore. Frederick had her letter now, and she clung to the hope of a telegram, even as she mocked herself for such foolishness. The possibility of receiving a message filled her with a youthful anticipation she hadn't felt in years. How she longed to be cherished, important to someone in a world teeming with people. The hours passed slowly, stretching like the shadows over the rocks. In the distance, Lottie and Lady Caroline, affectionately known as Scrap, had ventured into the hills, leaving Rose to her solitude. Mr. Wilkins, ever the considerate companion, divided his time between Mrs. Fisher and Rose, though today Rose had successfully evaded him. When lunchtime approached, Rose reluctantly returned to the villa, her heart a battle between hope and resignation. But before she could reach the dining room, Mr. Wilkins intercepted her, a telegram in hand. Her heart leapt, only to sink as she read the sender's name. Thomas Briggs, the owner of San Salvatore, not Frederick. Am passing through on way to Rome. May I pay my respects this afternoon? The telegram read. Though she managed a smile for Mr. Wilkins, her disappointment was a palpable presence. Briggs, unlike Frederick, was the man who had chosen to visit, to be present. It was a bitter irony. As she shared the news of Briggs's impending visit, Mr. Wilkins, ever observant, noted the unusual pallor that had swept over her. Intrigued, he followed her into the dining room, pondering the significance of this unexpected guest. Meanwhile, Thomas Briggs was indeed on his way, his thoughts filled not with the state of his property, but with the image of Rose Arbuthnot. During their brief encounter in London, he had been captivated by her gentle demeanor and the sense of quiet strength she exuded. Now, as he journeyed from Mezzago to Castagneto, he was eager to see her again, to witness how she had made his house her own. Arriving at San Salvatore, Briggs was greeted by Francesca, who assured him of the villa's perfect condition. Yet it was Rose he wished to see, the woman whose likeness to an old portrait in his collection intrigued him. Upstairs, Rose descended the stairs, her white dress a stark contrast to the dim interior. Briggs, waiting by the portrait, couldn't help but draw comparisons between the painting and the woman before him. Taken aback by the resemblance, he asked Rose to remove her hat, confirming his suspicions. "Just stand still a moment," he requested, his voice filled with the excitement of discovery. Amused, Rose obliged, allowing him to make his measurements and comparisons. "Have you come to compare me with my original?" she asked, a hint of laughter in her voice. Francesca returned to inform them that Mrs. Fisher awaited Briggs in the garden, but Briggs, captivated by Rose, was reluctant to leave her side. "I don't want to go. You've got your hat on, so you were going for a walk. Mayn't I come too? I'd immensely like being shown around by you." Rose hesitated, but his earnestness softened her resolve. "Of course. It's your house," she replied, leading him through the villa's sunlit corridors. Their walk was filled with light conversation, both aware of the unspoken connection that had drawn them together. Briggs was enthralled by Rose's presence, eager to know more about the woman who had captured his imagination. As they strolled through the gardens, the vibrant blooms and the whispering breeze seemed to conspire to lighten Rose's heart. Briggs's attention was a balm to her wounded spirit, and for a moment she allowed herself to bask in the warmth of newfound friendship. Yet as the afternoon wore on, the shadow of Frederick's absence loomed large, a reminder of unfulfilled hopes and dreams. The arrival of Thomas Briggs, though unexpected, had brought a flicker of brightness to her day, a prelude to possibilities yet to unfold. As they returned to the villa, the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the garden path. In the distance, the laughter of Lottie and Scrap echoed softly, mingling with the murmur of the sea. Rose felt a shift within her, an awakening of desires long dormant, as if the very air of San Salvatore whispered promises of renewal and change. But what those changes might be remained uncertain, poised on the brink of discovery, as the day slipped gently into evening and the story of San Salvatore continued to unfold, drawing each of its inhabitants towards an unknown future. Chapter 18. In the warmth of the Italian spring, Rose and Mr. Briggs embarked on a leisurely walk that seemed to stretch the pleasantness of the afternoon indefinitely. The thyme-scented air enveloped them, and as they paused to sit in fragrant corners, a sense of tranquility settled over Rose. The morning's bitterness, a sharp reminder of past disappointments, began to fade with each step and each word exchanged with Mr. Briggs. Mr. Briggs was not a man to hide his feelings or delay expressing them. As they ambled along the path to the lighthouse, chosen for its width and level ground, he candidly revealed the impression Rose had left on him during their encounter in London. This confession, innocuous yet flattering, brought a rosy tint to Rose's cheeks. There was a certain delight in knowing she could captivate someone, especially someone as charming and intelligent as Mr. Briggs appeared to be. Their conversation meandered from the curiosities of San Salvatore to the more mundane aspects of daily life there. Briggs inquired with genuine interest about her experiences, and Rose found herself regretting how little she had noticed the beauty around her. Her mind, previously clouded with thoughts of her husband Frederick, had failed to register the art and history of the villa. Yet even in her internal musings, she acknowledged that the beauty of San Salvatore had been a constant, an unspoken backdrop to her longing to share it with someone. As they walked, Briggs felt a growing sense of belonging, as though he were part of a family he had never known. Orphaned and without siblings, he was drawn to the warmth of a domestic life he had never experienced. The idea of marriage had begun to appeal to him, not out of necessity, but from a burgeoning desire for companionship and children. San Salvatore, though beautiful, felt empty to him without a partner, and in Rose he saw a glimpse of the familial warmth he sought. Briggs's laughter, prompted by a sudden thought, drew Rose's curiosity. He explained, "It's so like coming home," a sentiment that resonated with Rose despite her own complicated feelings about home. The conversation flowed easily, with Rose revealing snippets of her life in Hampstead and Briggs reciprocating with tales of his own. The afternoon unfolded as a series of revelations and shared laughter, leaving Rose feeling unexpectedly lighthearted. Upon their return to the villa for tea, the change in Rose was palpable. Her demeanor had shifted, her smile was brighter, and there was a liveliness in her eyes that Mr. Wilkins, observing from a distance, noted with professional interest. He speculated on the potential complications of having two men interested in Rose, and relished the thought of being called upon to mediate any resulting quandaries. The tea table was a scene of unexpected conviviality. Mrs. Fisher, usually reserved, found herself responding to Briggs's youthful charm with an uncharacteristic warmth. Her demeanor softened, and she even indulged in playful banter, revealing a side of herself that surprised everyone, including Rose. The transformation in Mrs. Fisher was as much a revelation to Rose as her own newfound lightness. Briggs, enjoying the company and the unexpected familial atmosphere, was in no hurry to leave. The idea of staying at a nearby hotel was dismissed as absurd by Lottie, who, with characteristic impulsiveness, insisted he stay at the villa. The suggestion was met with unanimous approval, with Mrs. Fisher even making an unexpected joke about the narrow confines of Kate Lumley's room, which she offered to Briggs. The evening air was filled with laughter and a sense of camaraderie that was new to the group. Lottie, returning from her picnic, witnessed the transformation in Mrs. Fisher and impulsively kissed her, a gesture that seemed to seal the warmth of the evening. Mrs. Fisher, unused to such displays of affection, was initially startled, but then deeply touched by the genuine gesture. As the group settled into the comfort of each other's company, Briggs's attention was drawn to the doorway. There, silhouetted against the fading light, stood Lady Caroline, her presence a startling vision of beauty. The anticipation of meeting her added a new layer of excitement to the evening, promising further developments in the days to come. And so, the evening at San Salvatore unfolded with a richness of human connection that had been absent before. With Briggs's arrival, the dynamics within the villa shifted, setting the stage for new alliances and unexpected revelations. As the sun dipped below, the horizon, casting its golden glow over the villa's gardens, it marked not just the end of the day, but the beginning of deeper bonds and unforeseen transformations for all its inhabitants. Chapter 19. Ferdinand Arundel, the writer of amusing memoirs, had found Lady Caroline Dester in an unexpected place. Here was Scrap, as her friends affectionately called her, hidden away in the Italian paradise of San Salvatore, on a quest for solitude and rest. Yet, despite her efforts to escape, the world had a way of catching up with her, as evidenced by Arundel's sudden appearance on the zigzag path. Lady Caroline, with her aristocratic lineage, had grown weary of the relentless pursuit and adoration that her beauty inspired. Her retreat to the Italian villa was meant to be a sanctuary from the admirers who sought her favor, a place where she could exist without the burdens of social expectations. The villa, with its enchanting gardens and the promise of anonymity, had drawn her in like a balm for her spirit. But now, here was Ferdinand Arundel, a man who seemed harmless enough with his jovial disposition and simple charm. In London, he had been merely a pleasant companion at her mother's luncheons. But now, standing before her with an apologetic smile and the sheen of perspiration on his brow, he represented the very intrusion she had sought to avoid. Scrap assessed him with the practiced eye of one who had dealt with admirers before. Arundel, with his middle-aged paunch and the hint of mischief in his eyes, was no threat in the way young Mr. Briggs might be. He was, she decided, a temporary inconvenience, a distraction from the real business of her retreat. "Tell me about Mother," she prompted, steering their conversation away from the awkwardness of his uninvited presence. "Your mother is quite well," Arundel replied, settling beside her with a sigh of relief. "She's been hosting her usual array of gatherings, though she misses you terribly." Scrap allowed herself a small smile. Her mother, Lady Droitwich, was a formidable hostess, always surrounded by the glittering crowd of London society. Scrap's absence had been a withdrawal from that world, a decision to step away from the limelight that had shone on her since birth. "And the others?" Scrap asked, genuinely curious despite herself. "Have they been behaving?" Arundel chuckled. "As much as they ever do. Your absence has left a noticeable gap, though. You have a way of making people behave better, you know." She shrugged lightly, dismissing the compliment. "I doubt that. So what brings you to Italy, Ferdinand? Surely not just me." His face softened with an earnestness that caught her off guard. "I was on my way to Rome for some research on my next book, but I couldn't resist the temptation to see you, especially after hearing from your mother where you were." Scrap glanced at him, torn between exasperation and amusement. It was always the way with these men, she thought. They claimed to be drawn by some irresistible force, yet what they pursued was often only a reflection of their own desires. "Well, you're here now," she said, relenting, "and you might as well join us for dinner. It's at 8. Arundel's face brightened with gratitude. "Thank you. I promise not to be a nuisance." As they sat together, the garden around them began to cool with the evening air, and the sky deepened into a rich indigo. The lights of the village below flickered to life, casting a soft glow that mingled with the scent of the sea and the distant sound of a dog barking. Inside the villa, Briggs was still entangled in a conversation with Mr. Wilkins, the latter regaling him with the tale of the oleander tree, a story that belonged more to Briggs than to the lawyer telling it. Briggs, with his heart caught in the thrall of Lady Caroline's beauty, listened with the patience of one whose thoughts lay elsewhere. Mrs. Fisher, meanwhile, had retreated indoors, her mind occupied with the logistics of hospitality and the unexpected addition of guests. Her thoughts wandered to Kate Lumley, the elusive friend whose room now provided a convenient excuse for Briggs's stay. As dinner approached, the villa buzzed with an undercurrent of anticipation. Each of its inhabitants carried their own hopes and fears, their private stories weaving a tapestry of human connection and longing. Scrap, with Arundel by her side, prepared to face the evening ahead. As they made their way back to the villa, she couldn't shake the feeling that her time of peace and solitude was slipping away. Yet within her stirred a reluctant acceptance of the world's persistence, and perhaps a glimmer of curiosity about what lay ahead. And so, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the night embraced San Salvatore, the villa's inhabitants gathered once more, their lives intertwining in unexpected ways. What new revelations awaited them, and how would their paths continue to cross in this enchanted April? Chapter 20. Arundel found himself in a delightful predicament, spinning tales to captivate Scrap. He'd run out of real stories about her mother, Lady Droitwich, and, in a bid to keep Scrap's attention, had resorted to crafting whimsical anecdotes. Lady Droitwich, in his stories, became a fountain of wit and humor, much to Scrap's surprise and amusement. Each revelation brought new light to her mother in Scrap's eyes, making her both proud and entertained. "Mother said that?" Scrap asked, her eyebrows raised in cheerful disbelief. Arundel nodded, inventing with ease. "Indeed she did, and you should have seen the look on Lloyd George's face." Scrap giggled, her affection for her mother growing with each tale. The dusk turned to darkness as Arundel continued his yarns, the time slipping by unnoticed until Scrap suddenly realized the hour. "Oh, good heavens!" she exclaimed, jumping to her feet. "I must run or I'll never be ready in time for dinner." With the grace of a deer, she hurried up the path, leaving Arundel to follow at a more leisurely pace to avoid arriving too flushed. Francesca, the ever-attentive maid, guided him indoors where he could freshen up, and eventually directed him to the drawing-room to cool off by the fire. The house was enveloped in the pre-dinner hush, with everyone occupied in their chambers preparing for the evening. Mr. Briggs was wrestling with his ties. Scrap was slipping into a discreet black dress to avoid Mr. Briggs's eager eyes. Mrs. Fisher was fastening her shawl with the brooch given by Ruskin, and Mr. Wilkins was brushing his wife's hair, a testament to his newfound demonstrativeness as she helped him with his studs. Meanwhile, Rose sat at her window reflecting on the day. Her thoughts drifted to the recent changes in San Salvatore, a place transformed by burgeoning affections. Lottie's infectious optimism had painted a picture of happiness, and Rose couldn't help but be swept up in it. Lottie had remarked on the love that seemed to envelop San Salvatore, predicting even more connections would blossom before they returned home. "Your husband might be here quite soon," Lottie had mused, her feet swinging playfully. "And won't it be wonderful to have a few days of bliss before we go back refreshed for life?" Rose, contemplating Lottie's words, found herself thinking of Frederick with renewed intensity. It was as if the admiration she'd received earlier had sparked a dormant vivacity within her, leaving her both amused and wistful. For a brief moment she had felt truly alive, her heart light and her spirits lifted. She had been admired, and that simple fact had made her soul dance. Determined to carry this newfound vibrance home, she resolved to confront Frederick upon her return. The separate lives, the solitude, they had to end. Why, she wondered, shouldn't she too bask in love's warmth? As she dressed, energy surging through her, she almost adorned herself with a crimson camellia, but thought better of it, placing the flower back in water. It was nearly time for dinner, and feeling restless, Rose decided to step out to the battlements where the moon would rise above the sea. As she walked through the upper hall, she was drawn to the firelit drawing room, its warmth and flowers inviting. But as she stepped inside, she halted. There, in the window's glow, stood Frederick. Her heart thundered, disbelief mingling with joy. Frederick had come. Instantly she was filled with a rush of emotions, the miracle of his presence overwhelming. Her mind stumbled, unable to process but feeling deeply. He had come, which meant he needed her, wanted her. "Frederick," she tried to say, but her voice faltered. She moved toward him, her heart a drumbeat in her ears. He didn't turn, and she crept closer, until she stood right beside him, her heart's rhythm merging with her breathless whisper. "Frederick," she managed, and he spun around, surprise etched on his face. "Rose!" he exclaimed, his voice a mix of confusion and recognition. But Rose didn't see his expression, for her arms encircled him, her cheek pressed to his, her words a soft litany in his ear. "I knew you would come. In my very heart I always, always knew you would come." In the comforting embrace of the firelight, San Salvatore's magic wove its spell, drawing hearts together, as the evening promised further revelations and reconciliations. Chapter 21. In the serene and magical setting of San Salvatore, an Italian castle perched high above the Mediterranean, time seemed to slow, allowing love and reconciliation to unfold in unexpected ways. Frederick Arbuthnot, a man of middle age and not without his complexities, found himself in a bewildering yet heartwarming embrace with his wife, Rose, who had become distant over the years due to their conflicting ideals and lifestyles. But here, in this enchanted place, she clung to him with a fervor he hadn't felt in years, murmuring words of love and welcome. Frederick, a man who had always avoided causing harm if he could help it, was enveloped in confusion and nostalgia. The softness of Rose's cheek against his, the familiar scent of her hair. It was as if the past had returned, and with it the passionate love they once shared. He couldn't recall the last time they had held each other with such tenderness, but in this moment, none of that mattered. He reciprocated her affection with increasing warmth, kissing her as though they had never stopped. As they embraced, Frederick was filled with a sense of security, a rare and precious feeling for someone who had often felt the weight of his age and the inevitable changes it brought. With Rose, he was not the man who worried about his appearance or stamina, nor was he the man who sought validation from the admiration of younger women. In her eyes, he was still the lover of her youth, unchanged and adored. Their reunion was so consuming that all thoughts of complications, such as his acquaintance with Lady Caroline, faded into the background. For the moment, Frederick was free to revel in the rediscovered love of his wife, who whispered to him about her loneliness and longing during their separation. Their intimate moment was interrupted by the arrival of Mr. Briggs, the charming young owner of the castle, who stumbled upon them quite unexpectedly. Briggs, who had previously believed Rose to be a widow, was taken aback by the scene before him. Yet despite the awkwardness, he managed to introduce himself, and Rose, still glowing with happiness, introduced Frederick as her husband. As the household gathered for dinner, the atmosphere was one of curious anticipation. Mrs. Fisher, the elder stateswoman of the group, observed the proceedings with a mixture of amusement and approval. Mr. Wilkins, ever the gentleman, greeted Frederick warmly, while Lottie, with her innate sense of joy and understanding, welcomed him effusively. The dinner table was set for an evening that promised revelations and transformations. Frederick, seated between Rose and the empty chair reserved for Lady Caroline, felt the weight of his situation. He was caught between two worlds, a past filled with misunderstandings and a present brimming with potential redemption. Lady Caroline, known for her beauty and grace, entered the dining room fashionably late. To Frederick's relief, she greeted him with warmth and poise, as if they were old friends, sparing him the embarrassment of explaining his prior intentions. Her demeanor was a testament to her upbringing in the upper echelons of society, where composure was paramount. As the evening unfolded, the conversation flowed with the ease that the castle seemed to inspire. Frederick, though initially apprehensive, found himself relaxing into the company of these newfound friends, each of whom had their own stories of transformation and healing. The dinner, much like the Enchanted April itself, was a time of renewal and possibility. The barriers that had once seemed insurmountable between Frederick and Rose dissolved in the warmth of their rekindled love. And as the night drew to a close, the promise of a new beginning lingered in the air. The next chapter would bring further exploration of these relationships, as the residents of San Salvatore continued to discover the profound changes wrought by their time in this magical place. The enchantment of April was far from over, and with it came the certainty that love, once found, could indeed be found again. Chapter 22. On the evening of the full moon, the garden at San Salvatore transformed into an ethereal realm, where every flower seemed to glow with a ghostly white hue. The lilies, daphnes, orange blossoms, white stocks, pinks, and roses all stood out distinctly against the night, while the colored flowers contributed their fragrance to the air. It was a scene steeped in tranquility and magic. The three younger women, Lottie, Scrap, and Rose, sat quietly on the low wall at the end of the upper garden after dinner. They gazed at the enormous moon, which slowly ascended over the landscape where the poet Shelley had spent his last days a century prior. The sea shimmered under the moon's glow, and the stillness of the night was palpable. The dining room, visible through the glass doors, was a vibrant contrast to the serene outdoors, with its candle-lit table and a bright display of nasturtiums and marigolds. Inside, the men smoked and conversed, animated figures in the backdrop of the evening's calm. Mrs. Fisher had retreated to the drawing-room, seeking the warmth of the fire. Lottie and Scrap, their faces upturned to the sky, spoke little, their words mere whispers. Rose, too, was silent, her face lifted towards the umbrella pine, which stood transformed into a silhouette of grandeur against the starry sky. Scrap and Lottie observed Rose with quiet admiration. Her beauty was undeniable, radiant in the moonlight. "Love," Lottie whispered to Scrap, nodding towards Rose. Scrap acknowledged the sentiment. "Yes," she breathed, unable to deny the aura of love surrounding Rose. "There's nothing like it," Lottie murmured, her voice carrying the weight of conviction. Scrap remained silent, aware of the pervasive presence of love. It filled the air, inescapable, even stirring Mrs. Fisher, who during dinner had shown uncharacteristic concern for Mr. Briggs, her face softening with maternal warmth. Scrap's thoughts drifted to the eternal link between beauty and love. She wrapped her shawl around her, a gesture of self-protection against the vast emotions the night invoked. The beauty of the night invited feelings of rapture, introspection, and a profound sense of longing, making her feel vulnerable and exposed. "I suppose," Lottie whispered, "Rose's husband seems to you just an ordinary, good-natured, middle-aged man." Scrap refocused, nodding slightly in agreement. "Just a rather red, rather round man," Lottie continued, her voice barely audible. Scrap nodded again. "He isn't," Lottie insisted softly. "Rose sees through all that. That's mere trimmings. She sees what we can't see because she loves him." Love, Scrap mused, was indeed transformative, yet she knew too well its capacity to warp and distort, having experienced its suffocating excess in her own life. She had been spoiled, turned suspicious and selfish by love's overwhelming attention. Love had not made her a saint. It had left her a spinster, wary and reclusive. The glass doors creaked open, and the men stepped out, Mr. Wilkins leading with his usual flow of conversation. Scrap considered retreating to avoid Mr. Briggs, whose infatuation with her was unmistakably intense and troubling. As Scrap moved to a quieter spot in the garden, she encountered Frederick, who approached with urgency. "I was determined to find you first," he asserted, his voice filled with a newfound warmth, "before I go to Rose." Scrap, amused, responded lightly, "Then I must go and put on my new ones," as he expressed a desire to kiss her shoes in gratitude. Frederick's demeanor had changed, and Scrap felt a genuine liking for him. His face, like Rose's, was illuminated with a light of happiness, signaling a resolution to whatever had troubled him. "I shall adore you forever now," he declared, full of admiration for Scrap's beauty and decency. Scrap, touched by his words, realized the sincerity behind them. "Is it?" she asked, a hint of wistfulness in her voice, as he praised her loyalty and character. Frederick kissed her hand swiftly and departed, leaving Scrap to ponder the events that had unfolded. She arranged for his luggage to be retrieved, ensuring nothing would mar the happiness of Rose and Frederick's reunion. Returning to the garden, Scrap was struck by a wave of gratitude towards Mr. Briggs. Despite her earlier churlishness, she acknowledged how much she owed him for the peace and recovery she had found at San Salvatore. Compunction and gratitude mingled within her as she approached him. "I owe you so much," she confessed earnestly, her heart full of acknowledgment for the joy his hospitality had brought her. Briggs, astonished, could only stammer a reply, his admiration for her evident. Mr. Wilkins, observing the exchange, deemed it unwise, concerned that Scrap's words might encourage Briggs's infatuation. Lottie, sensing her husband's disapproval, led him away, assuring him that Lady Caroline was perfectly fine. Despite Mr. Wilkins's reluctance, Lottie insisted on discussing something indoors, leaving Scrap and Briggs in the moonlit garden. Inside, Mrs. Fisher sat by the fire, lost in thoughts of the past and the longing for companionship. Mrs. Wilkins, sensing the elder woman's solitude, crossed over to her, offering a gesture of warmth and kindness. "We've come in," she said cheerfully, as Mrs. Fisher held her cheek against her own, finding comfort in the living presence beside her. As the evening unfolded, the garden, bathed in moonlight, bore witness to transformations and revelations. The connections forged at San Salvatore deepened, setting the stage for new beginnings. The characters, touched by the magic of the place and the power of love, found themselves on paths they had not anticipated, and as the night wore on, the promises of the coming days lingered in the fragrant air, ready to unfurl with the dawn. As the gentle embrace of the Italian spring faded into the warm whispers of summer, the lives of our four heroines, Lottie, Rose, Mrs. Fisher, and Caroline, had been undeniably transformed. Each had found more than just a fleeting escape from the drudgeries of their everyday existence. They had discovered a deeper connection to themselves and to the world around them, all beneath the enchanted skies of San Salvatore. Lottie returned to her life in England, her heart aglow with newfound confidence and joy, ready to infuse her every day with the magic she had unearthed. Rose rekindled her own inner light, shedding the shadows of doubt and stepping into the warmth of love that awaited her. Mrs. Fisher, with her reverence for the past, found a fresh appreciation for the present, while Caroline, ever the free spirit, embraced the vibrant future with open arms. And so, dear listener, as the gentle waves of the Mediterranean lap at the shores of San Salvatore, we leave our friends to bask in their newfound happiness. But the enchantment of April is not confined to the pages of their story. It lingers on, inviting each of us to seek our own transformation wherever we may find it. If this journey through the Enchanted April has warmed your heart as much as the Italian sunshine, why not share the magic? Give us a like, share this tale with fellow dreamers, and subscribe for more adventures. We would love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and let us know which classic you'd like us to bring to life next. Until then, may your days be filled with enchantment and endless possibilities.